Hello, hello. Welcome again to Cynthia Martin Online. And today we're going to be talking about what if we have misunderstood one of the hardest things that Jesus ever said. I had, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. Jesus said in several places, if anyone would follow me, come and let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. That's a loosely CMO version. CMO version is Cynthia Martin version, right? We say that in several places in the gospel. And when we hear those words, deny yourself, we immediately think, what are we going to lose? Right? And what am I going to have to give up? And what will God ask me to surrender? What is it that I'm no longer going to be able to do? But, what if we thought about it as Jesus cost me something I really want? But what if we're looking at it from the wrong direction? What if Jesus was not simply asking his disciples to give up something? He was inviting them to trade up. What if self-denial isn't ultimately about losing your life, but finally discovering the life that you were created to live, right? That's biblical. Because immediately after Jesus tells us to deny ourselves and take up the cross or our cross and follow him, he says something extraordinary. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whosoever loses his life for my sake will find it. So Jesus is describing an exchange, and you can hold tightly to the life that you've designed for yourself, or you can surrender that life to him and discover the life that only can be found by following him. I call this the upward exchange, right? If you follow me often, you'll see me do this. It's about having that connection, that portal with the Lord. Well, today I want to really talk about what Jesus meant when he told us to deny ourselves and take up our cross and follow him. Because many Christians, or I think many Christians, understand what Jesus asks us to lay down without really understanding what he's inviting us to pick up. We see the cost, we don't always see the gain. And when all we see is sacrifice, Christianity can begin to feel like a duty and an endless list of things that we're not allowed to do. Christians don't do this, Christians don't do that, Christians don't do this, right? Have you heard that before? Don't do this, don't do that, give up that, say no to yourself. But that's not the whole picture. Jesus calls us to surrender. He does call us to die to ourselves, and he does call us to pick up his cross, but he never calls us to surrender simply for the sake of depriving, right? He calls us to leave one way of life because he's leading us into another. And the life he calls us to is higher than the one we could build for ourselves. I think one of the reasons we struggle so much with surrender is because we're constantly calculating the loss. We ask, what will this obedience cost me? What relationship might I lose? What dream may I have to surrender? What if he sends me to Africa? What if God's plan is different than mine? And underneath many of those questions is a deeper fear. What if I give my life to God and I end up with less? That's really the question. Can I trust him with my life? Can I trust him with what he's asked me to release is not greater than what I receive by having him? Well, that's a new way to look at it, isn't it? Because we think, wait a minute, I've been thinking about this wrong. Because that's where following Jesus becomes more than religion. Because Christianity is not merely agreeing with the Lord Jesus, right? Agreeing with the Bible. Eventually, we have to decide whether we trust him enough to actually let him lead us. Are we really going to follow him or just believe in him? The one thing I appreciate about Jesus is that he never tried to make following him sound easier than it was. He never manipulated people into becoming disciples. And he never promised that following him would make every part of our life more comfortable. He was honest. In Luke chapter 9, verse 23, Jesus said, if anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. By the way, I looked it up. It's listed in every one of the Gospels. It's listed there, and it's 6 times. So in Matthew and I believe it's Luke, that's listed twice. Notice what he did not say in that verse, though. He did not say, add me to the life you've already chosen. That's ridiculous, isn't it? But that's what we try to do. He did not say, follow me as long as my direction agrees with you. He did not say, come to me and I will help you accomplish everything that you've decided that you wanted. He said, deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me. Those are not casual words. Following Jesus requires surrender. It's not a duty list of things that we don't like to do, that we just have to bear this load. And there's a cost to discipleship, though, truly. And Jesus wanted people to understand that before they decided to follow him, that was what the truth was. He never tells us a partial truth. In Luke chapter 14, Jesus told the crowds to count the cost. He gave the example of someone building a tower who first sits down and determines whether he has enough to finish it. Now that's wisdom. And in Luke chapter 14, verse 33, the verse says, so likewise, whoever of you does not forsake all that he has cannot be my disciple. That's really strong language. Jesus was not trying to build the largest audience possible. He was making disciples, and there's a difference. There's a difference between just attracting people and getting a larger organization or a larger following. The Bible doesn't tell us to do that. The Bible tells us to make disciples. And discipleship requires much more, something much more deeper than simply believing certain facts about Jesus. A disciple places his or her life under the leadership of Jesus. That means that there will be moments when what I want and what Jesus says are not the same thing sometimes, right? And there will be moments when my feelings point in one direction and obedience requires another. Ouch, right? There will be things that I will have to lay down. That is truth. There will be attitudes that I cannot carry. Oh my, pick me. That was my big one. And there will be relationships, habits, ambitions, and ways of thinking and patterns of living that cannot come with me where Jesus is leading me. Let me repeat that. There will be relationships, habits, there will be ambitions, there will be ways of thinking, there will be patterns of living that cannot come with me if I'm going to be where Jesus is. Where he's leading me, I cannot take those things with me. And sometimes that's where we become uncomfortable because we like the idea of saving us, Jesus saving us, right? We like being saved and having our name written in the Lamb's book of life and being loved and chosen, accepted, and all of the wonderful benefits that salvation brings. But we're not always comfortable with Jesus leading us, because what if he goes someplace I don't want to go? Now, come on, that's the truth. We want him as Savior, but following him means he is also Lord. And if he's Lord, when I'm no longer the highest authority in my life, then that means that I need to surrender. I don't get to decide what is true based on what I feel. And I do not get to redefine obedience based on what is convenient. I do not get to hold on to everything I want simply because Jesus and ask Jesus to bless it, right? This is mine. Bless it, bless it, bless it, bless it. I'm going to stop here in the midst of what I'm saying and tell you a short story. When I was in Bible school, I told the Lord that I would attend every class, and I never missed any classes. We were required to go to church, right? We were required once a week. I went every time the doors were open. I went for prayer meetings. I did all the extra. I applied myself. I got involved in ministries. I did everything that I could do to make sure that I was getting everything that I could get during that time. And I was praying during that time, Lord, I'm here. And I'd remind him, I'm coming. I came. I'm doing what you've asked me to do. I'm gathering all the information. My heart is open. I'm doing the research. I'm following my professors. I'm handing in my homework. I'm going above and beyond. I'm in ministries. I'm attending. I'm right. And Lord, I'm giving this all to you. And when I leave here, when I get that graduation diploma, God, I'm asking you to go with me. And I prayed that, and I prayed that, and I prayed that. And the Lord one time stopped me with a definite word: no. I was like, what? Didn't that sound like a really nice prayer? He said, no, I don't go with you. You go with me. Oh, I was startled. I was speechless. And if you know me very much, for me to be speechless, that's a big thing. And immediately, my heart, I bowed in surrender, right? Yes, Lord, I choose to follow you. It also removes a bunch of weight to realize I'm not in charge. All I have to do is follow, right? I love there's a line in The Chosen in which Matthew says to Gaius, I get up and I'm confused. And then I remember all I have to do today is follow him. I love that line. That is such a great line for what we have to do. So I don't get to, as I've repeated, decide what's true based on what I feel. I don't get to redefine obedience based on what's convenient for me. I don't get to hold on to everything I want and simply ask Jesus to bless it, right? Following Jesus means that my life belongs to him. Paul describes it this way in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That does not mean that we lose our personality. That does not mean that we lose our history. It does not mean that we stop having desires and dreams and gifts or individuality. You know, he's all into individualism, not sameness. It means that we surrender the right to be our own Lord. We stop giving and living as though we belong only to ourselves. In our culture, a cross can become a piece of jewelry, right? And that's why we got to think about the language of the cross, right? It can become a decoration, right? It can become a necklace or earrings or a bracelet or something pretty on our shirt. But when Jesus spoke those words, the cross represented death. So when Jesus said, take up your cross and follow me, his listeners would not have heard that as a religious expression. I always said, I wish someone would come up with some jewelry with an empty grave, right? They would have understood that following him was going to require death to self-rule, the death of self as the final authority, the death of the belief that my life is mine to do with whatever I want. American individualism, our democracy. I have a voice and I can be who I want to be, right? And that is costly. We should not pretend otherwise. We're fooling ourselves if we do. Obedience can cost us. Forgiveness can cost us. Walking away from sin can cost us. Telling the truth can cost us. Oh, I learned that one the hard way. And choosing integrity can cost us. Following God's direction when other people do not understand can cost us. Jesus never hid that. But here's where I think we often stop the conversation too soon. We talk about the cost of following Jesus. We talk about what has to die. We talk about I have to surrender that. I got to give this up. My husband and I were singles pastors many years ago. And it was very popular during Lent for people to decide what they were going to give up during the Lent season. Now, I have some really strong opinions about Lent season, and you'll have to check that out somewhere else or send me an email and ask me about that, but because I don't want to get sidetracked. But they were going to be doing some serious fasting, and one of our members said that she was going to fast dangly earrings. And I said, okay. She goes, yeah, but you just don't understand. I've never in the last 20 years not wore a pair of dangly earrings. And I was like, okay, to each their own. Now, for me, that was not sacrifice, but for her, that was a sacrifice. All right. Sorry, I got a little bit off track, but that statement just reminded me after it came out of my mouth. I thought, oh my gosh, that reminds me of, and right. So Jesus didn't say to us, lose your life. And that was the end, right? He said, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. That's what our focus must be on, is we'll find it. There is a cost, but there's also a gain. there is a surrender, but there's also an exchange. If we only talk about what Jesus costs us, we will completely miss what Jesus is actually intending to do. This is where I want to go next, because the question is not simply, what will it cost me to follow Jesus? Now, we need to be aware of that. But that's not the only question. The deeper question is what am I going to do, or what am I gaining that is worth the cost? Right? We have to exchange. We have to think about the cost, just as the scripture that I mentioned earlier, that before we build a tower, we sit down and consider the cost. Because in Christianity and religion, we talk a lot about what it costs to follow Jesus and how we need to change our life, and we need to not do these things, and we need to sacrifice, and we need to surrender, and we need to die to self, and we need to take up our cross, and we need to be obedient. And all of that is true. I don't want to steer you off, right? That is truth. But when we focus only on the cross, we start to make discipleship sound like one long process of losing things. And though following Jesus means giving and giving and giving until there's nothing left of you, but that's not the picture that Jesus gives us, right? Jesus speaks about loss, yes, but he also speaks about gain. He speaks about finding life, finding freedom, finding fruit, finding treasure, finding peace, finding joy. He speaks about becoming who he really created us to be. There's a statement that says we're becoming who we already were, right? So maybe surrender is not simply losing. Maybe surrender is an exchange. Maybe when Jesus asks us to lay down something, he's not trying to make our life smaller. He's trying to free our hands to receive something greater. Many, many years ago, I was in a relationship with a man who knew that he had a bunch of his stuff, we'll just say that, it clasped in a tight fist. And he knew that God was trying to pry his fingers off of the stuff, but he kept refusing. And he knew that he was supposed to release it, but he kept refusing. And that's such a great picture of what God is asking us to do, is to surrender it, to give it to him. He's freeing our hands. You can't pick up like a monkey who sticks his hand in a jar to get something in his hand now because it's fisted. He can't get it out, right? He's asking us to release our hands, release what's in our hands, so that we can receive something greater, something bigger. We can think about not holding on to one thing and to be able to fully receive another. At some point, you have to open your hands, and that's what surrender does. It opens our hands. It says, Lord, I'm willing to release what I've been clinging to so that I can receive what you have for me. I know when I had my period in my life that I called my so saved moment, previously I had a form of religion. I was probably saved. I don't know, but I do know that when I came to the end of myself and fully surrendered, I encountered the period of my life that I call so saved. Right. And so that at that point, I was willing to give up everything, including who I was. I had made a mess of my life. And so I was very willing to, even if it was all my fault, I just needed help, and I needed it right then. So it doesn't mean, though, that everything we're releasing is always sinful. Sometimes it's just simply lesser than what he wants for us. Sometimes it's something that he wants us to release for a temporary season. Sometimes it may be something that we're choosing for ourselves. And sometimes it may be something good that is keeping us from God's best, right? It doesn't have to be evil. Sometimes it's just good, and he wants us to have best. And this is where trust becomes so important, because surrender isn't just about obedience. It's about what we believe about God. Do I believe that he's good? Do I believe he sees what I cannot see? Do I believe his wisdom is greater than mine? Do I believe he knows what will actually produce life in me? Do I believe that when he says no to something, he's not trying to deprive me? Do I believe that when he asks me to let go, that there's a purpose in it? He isn't just trying to see if I'll suffer and squirm just for the sake of obedience. That is why self-denial is so difficult when we do not really trust God's character. If I see God as restrictive and controlling and he withholds from me, right in the garden, the serpent said to Eve, no, that's not true. He knows that if you eat of this fruit, you'll become like him, right? Oh, my God must be holding out, right? When we believe that, then every act of obedience will feel like loss. But if I know him as good and wise and faithful and true and loving, then surrender becomes something different. It becomes an upward exchange, right? I'm giving this to you, and he gives me back so much more. I'm not simply saying no to myself, I'm saying yes to him. I'm not simply laying down my plan, I'm receiving his leadership. I'm not simply giving up control, I'm receiving peace. I'm not simply walking away from sin, I'm walking into freedom. Let me repeat that. I'm walking into freedom. I'm not simply releasing the temporary, I'm choosing what is eternal. I'm not simply dying to self, I'm learning how to live. And that is what Jesus meant when he said, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. The life of surrender is not a life that is not the only life that's available to us, right? There's another kind of life, a kingdom life, a spirit-led life, a life that's no longer driven by fear or impulses or pride or comparison or control or the constant need to protect ourselves. We're laying down something lower to receive something higher. We are exchanging self-rule for the leadership of Jesus. We're exchanging bondage bondage for freedom. We're exchanging confusion for truth. We're exchanging temporary satisfaction for eternal purpose. We're exchanging the exhaustion of trying to save our own lives for the freedom of entrusting our lives to God and letting it be his problem, right? I've told my mentoring group often that when I gave my life over to the Lord and I realized, I believe it's in Philippians, there's a verse that says that he's going to be faithful to complete it. And so I said, I've given this all to you. I've surrendered it all. It's now your problem to fix it and fix me. You're like, really? You told God that? Yeah, I'm really real with God. And sometimes I'll get into something and I'll say, I don't know, God, this is not my problem. This is your problem. I belong to you. I'm following you. Correct me, speak to me, change my view. Let me see where I need to turn around, do what, but whatever. This is your problem, not my own. That's how I live my life with the Lord. It's very upfront, very, just like I talk to you, just real. So when we do that exchange and release that exhausting work, right? Oh, trying to save ourselves, trying to do it right, trying to make the right choice, trying to go the right road, we can entrust God to do the right thing and we can follow him. This does not mean that it always feels good in the moment, right? You're like, oh, I have to forgive that person. I'd rather just slap them. Come on, you've never felt that way, but it's true. Sometimes surrender hurts. Sometimes obedience feels costly when before we see the fruit, right? Sometimes there's grief involved in letting go. We have to say goodbye to something that's been our friend for a very long time. Sometimes there's a lesson between what we release and what we understand. But even then, the exchange is still upward because the greatest thing we receive is not always a new circumstance. It's him, more of his leadership in our life, more of his truth, more freedom from from whatever controlled us, more alignment with who he created us to be. And that is why we have to stop surrendering and measuring. We have to stop measuring surrender by what leaves in our hands, right? Stop measuring surrender by the loss. We also have to ask, what is God forming in me? Do we ever stop and think about that? God, what are you moving in me? What are you changing in me? What are you freeing me from? What are you teaching me about trusting you in a deeper place? What kind of person am I becoming as I follow you? Am I becoming more like you? Because the real gain of discipleship is not merely that God gives us better things. He doesn't just move us up a model, right? The real gain is that in following Jesus, we're brought into a better way of living. And that leads us to the next question. What exactly are we laying down and what are we gaining in return? So, what are we actually laying down when we follow Jesus? What are we actually gaining? This is where the idea of the upward exchange becomes practical because following Jesus is not a vague idea of surrender. There are real things that we are called to release, and there are real things that we receive as we walk with Him. We lay down self rule, we gain leadership of Jesus, right? We gain Him as our leader. That's a major exchange. Before Jesus, we decide what's best for us, sometimes after. We decide what's true. I decide what I want. We decide where we're going, right? But when we follow Jesus, I'm saying, Lord, I trust you. I trust your leadership more than my own. That might sound restrictive until we remember who's leading us. The one who walks on water, girlfriend. The one who knows us better than we know ourselves. The one who's never confused, never deceived, never impulsive, never selfish, and the one who sees it all from the end to the beginning, from the beginning to the end. We're not giving up wise leadership. We're giving up limited leadership, right? We can only lead as far as what we have the power to do, with the power to understand, the power of the energy, right? The knowledge. And we're exchanging that for His, which is unlimited. We lay down the need to control everything and we gain the freedom to trust God who knows all things. So much of our exhaustion comes from trying to carry responsibilities that were never ours to carry. I have a story that I tell all the time is that I'm a high energy person and I love to be busy. I'm not busy, I'll create busy. And I'll be off doing this and I'll decide I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to do a podcast. And then I'm going to do this. And then I'm going to do a daily devotional series. And then and I'll get so exhausted and I'll say, oh, I can't keep this up. God, I'm so tired. Your word says your yoke is easy and your burden is light. And He's like, what? I never told you to do any of those things. Right? I catch myself there quite often because I try to do it on my own. And at times we can try to control the outcome because we want to steer it in the way that works best for us. We try to control people so they'll act the way we want them to. We control the timing. No, not yet. Don't go yet. I'm not going to do that. I'm still going to pray about it, right? We try to control what other people think. We try to control how everything turns out. And we wonder why we're tired. Following Jesus teaches us to obey what He has given us to do and release what belongs to Him. That's such a much lighter weight, so much easier to rest in Him. And that, again, my friend, is an upward exchange, giving back to Him and He gives back to us. We lay down control, we gain peace. We lay down sin, we gain freedom. The world often presents sin as freedom. I get to do what I want. See my head bobble, right? That's when I'm in charge. Do whatever you want, the world says. Follow every desire. Get whatever you can before you die. Answer every impulse. Do what feels right. But if I cannot say no to my desires, am I really free? If my feelings control me, am I free? If I know that something is destroying me, but I cannot walk away from it, am I really free? See, Jesus does not call us away from sin because He wants to take away life from us. He calls us away from sin because it enslaves us. Real freedom is not the ability to do whatever I want. Real freedom is the ability to choose what is right, even when my flesh wants something else. So when we deny the flesh, we're not becoming less free. We're becoming more free. We lay down lies, we gain truth, and many of us have lived for years under the belief that we did not even realize were shaping us. I did. I'm not enough. I have to earn life or love, excuse me. I have to earn love. I have to earn life or whatever. That was one of my beliefs, is that I was a bother to humanity. So I had to earn the right to live in this life. I have to keep everybody happy, right? Just make everybody happy. Do whatever you have to do, even if it means sacrifice yourself. God's got to be disappointed in me because, I'm just kind of a mess up. And the belief that nothing will ever change. This is just who I am, right? He made me. He knows who I am. But when we follow Jesus, those beliefs have to come under the authority of truth. When we lay down what experience has taught us, we receive what God says. When we lay down these false identities, these identity stickers that have been placed on us throughout our life, we receive who we are because of Jesus. That's an upward exchange. We lay down fear, we gain faith. That does not mean we never feel afraid. It means fear no longer gets the final vote. We can still feel fear. We can still feel fear. Feel fear. Yeah, right. Tripping over my words. We can still feel fear and still obey, right? We still can have authority over it. We can still feel uncertain and still trust that God will show us the way. We can not know what's coming and still know that He's leading us. Faith does not require us to understand everything. If it was, it wouldn't be faith, right? It requires us to trust the one that we're following. We lay down the need for approval. We gain the freedom to obey God. People pleasing can feel like safety, right? Keep everybody happy. Don't upset anyone. Do what is expected. Stay small, right? Be seen and not heard. Don't risk being understood. Don't make any waves. Don't buck the system. But eventually, you're going to reach a place where obeying God and pleasing people both of those cannot be your highest priority. You can't do that. You cannot please people and please God. Sometimes pleasing people goes along with God's path. But when people pleasing outweighs pleasing God, we got a problem. And in that moment, something has to be laid down. The approval of people, the fear of rejection, the need to be understood by everyone. And what do we gain? We gain the freedom to live before God instead of performing for people. We live for an audience of one. We lay down our agenda. We gain God's purpose. This may be one of the hardest exchanges, right? Because who He created us to be is inside of us, that DNA. It's in our DNA. And so there are desires that are really leaning towards what God has for us. But a lot of times we misunderstand and misinterpret the leanings towards. And so when we release them, He is able to clarify those in truth. Because at times we make plans, we develop dreams, we decide how we think life should go, and then God leads differently. And following Jesus means holding our plans with open hands, not hanging on to what He has said or what we think He has said. We even have to let go of that. Because I know over my life that what a vision that I would have was true, and I thought I understood the full truth of what it meant. But then God reveals something else to me, and I see that vision that was true, but it also means this part too, right? And over the years, the vision has changed, but it still connects all together because we don't always see where God is going and what He is doing. And it has something to do with our spiritual maturity and our ability to be obedient and to yield to His leadership. Okay, so following means leaving our hands open, not because the plans are wrong that we have, and not because our desires are wrong, but because our plans are the Lord's. Sometimes what we surrender is clearly sinful, right? Sometimes what we surrender is something that we chose that God is asking us to release. That's not for you. Let it go. You're entrapped in that. And sometimes what we surrender is good, but good is not always the same as God's assignment. We lay down what is temporary, we gain what is eternal. Jesus asked in Matthew chapter 18, or excuse me, Matthew chapter 16, for what profit is it to a man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? That question turns the value system of the world upside down. Get all you can, do what feels good, be your own boss, right? Do what you want to do. The world says gain everything that you can, make more money, more influence, more recognition, more comfort, more possessions, more successes, right? I was thinking about the book that Dale Carnegie wrote, something about influence. Sorry, the name of it just went out of my head. But Jesus asks, what does it matter if you gain all of that and lose what really matters? Following Jesus teaches us to measure our lives differently, not by just what we accumulate, by who we become, by whether we've obeyed, by whether we loved well, whether we were faithful, and whether our lives had eternal fruit. We lay down our old way of living and we gain a new life in Christ. We lay down, we give it to him, which is kind of an oxymoron because we're talking about laying it down, but we're releasing it, right? And then we receive back a new life. And Paul in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, Scripture says, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation, and all things have passed away, and behold, all things have become new. The Christian life is not Jesus helping us to improve an old version of ourselves. It's a new life. Now, have we been taught how to live out of that new life? Probably not, but that's what I'm about, right? It's teaching you to how to leave the old and embrace the new. The new identity, the new citizenship, the new priorities, the new desires, a new way of seeing the world, a new way of living in it. And that's why I call it an upward exchange. Because Jesus is not simply taking things away from us. He's calling us out of one way of living into another, out of bondage into freedom, out of lies into truth, out of self-rule into his leadership, out of fear into faith, out of temporary purpose into eternal purpose, out of trying to save our own lives and into the life that is found only by following him. And here is the question we have to ask ourselves. What am I still holding on to because I've only been looking at what surrender will cost me? Let me repeat that. What am I still holding on to because I've only looked at what surrender will cost me? Maybe the better question is what could be waiting on the other side of this obedience? Same question, different perspective. Because before we can truly understand the exchange, we have to understand something even deeper. The cross is not merely about improving behavior. It's not behavior modification. It's about who has ownership of your life. And this is where we have to be careful not to reduce Christianity to self-improvement. Jesus didn't come to simply come, 3 steps to a better life, to have a better version of ourselves. He did not come to make us nicer, more disciplined, more successful, more emotionally healthy, more productive. And because those things probably will change as we follow him, and there'll probably be an end result, but that isn't the result that he came for. That's not the center of the gospel. The cross is not a self-help program. The cross is a place of death. And when Jesus tells us to take up our cross and follow him, he is not inviting us to polish the old life. He's calling us to surrender it. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 19 and 20, you are not your own. You were bought for a price. That is the language of ownership. You are not your own. That is not a popular message in culture built around self. It's built more around self-determination, right? How many would have a conference that says, come and die? How many would be signing up for the conference? Not many, I don't think. Our culture says, it's my life, it's my truth, it's my body, it's my choice, it's my dreams, it's my future, and I'm not hurting anybody else. But the gospel says something different. If you belong to Jesus, your life is no longer your own the same way as it was before. You've been bought with a price. You belong to him. That means that discipleship is not simply asking, how can Jesus help me improve my life? The better question is Jesus, what do you want to do with my life now that it belongs to you? Let's say that again. Jesus, what do you want to do with my life now that it belongs to you? And then wait and listen. Now that's a completely different posture, because self-improvement keeps me at the center. I'm still the owner. I'm still setting the goals. I'm still deciding what kind of life I want. I'm asking Jesus to help me get there. Come bless me like I was in Bible school. Lord, I'm doing all this stuff. And when I get out, I want you to go before me. I want you to do this and I want you to do that, right? Like I was in charge. And he said, no. But surrender moves us to putting Jesus at the center. Now I'm asking, what do you want? Where are you leading? What needs to change? What needs to go? What do I need to obey? What have you called me to do? That is the transfer of ownership. In Romans, Paul says in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service. A living sacrifice. That's such an interesting picture, because the problem with the living sacrifice is that it can crawl back off the altar. Have you found yourself at that place? Sometimes that's exactly what we do. We surrender, then we take it back. We say, Lord, my life is yours, until his plan becomes uncomfortable. Lord, I trust you, until we do not understand what he's doing. Lord, I'll follow you anywhere, until he leads us somewhere that we might not have chosen. Or he asks us to do something that, I don't really want to do that. What if they think I'm weird? And then suddenly we want to renegotiate the terms. But surrender is not a one-time emotional moment. It's a daily decision. That is why Jesus said, take up your cross daily. He didn't say once. He says daily. He even marks it out. He knows us. He knows we're just dumb sheep. Every day I decide again, my life belongs to you. My body belongs to you. My time belongs to you. My gifts belong to you. My resources belong to you. My plans belong to you. My future belongs to you. Not because God is trying to take everything away from me, but because he has everything is really the safest in his hands. Ownership sounds restrictive until you understand the character of the one who owns you. You're not surrendering yourself to someone who's cruel. You're not surrendering yourself to someone who's selfish. You're not surrendering yourself to someone who uses people. We belong to the one who gave himself for us. Think of that. What would he withhold from us if he was willing already? He's proven that he was willing to give everything, even his life. The one who went to the cross for us. He's the one who loved us first, the one who knows exactly what we were created for. So the transfer of ownership is not from freedom into bondage. It is from bondage into belonging. From being ruled by sin, by fear, by the culture, by wounds, by our training, our experiences, our impulses, self-protection, into belonging to Jesus. That's where true freedom begins. Because here's a tiny, maybe I shouldn't say tiny, here's the irony. The more determined I am to own my life, the more vulnerable I am to being controlled by everything again. My desires, my emotions, fear, my need for approval, my need for success, my past, my habits, my need to protect myself, my need to be right, my need to stay in control. But when I give up ownership of my life to Jesus, those things lose their right to rule me. Now, Jesus is Lord, not fear, not people, not my feelings, not my past, not my flesh. Jesus is the owner. That's why Paul said in Galatians chapter 2, verse 20, I've been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. That does not mean Paul stopped being Paul. It means Paul no longer saw himself as the owner of his life. His life belonged to Jesus. His direction came from Jesus. His purpose came from Jesus. His identity came from Jesus. And that is the difference between trying to become a better Christian and actually following Christ. And this is the difference between trying to become, it's the difference that as a better Christian, we may be still trying to stay in charge, right? A disciple has surrendered the right to stay in charge. That does not mean we become passive and we just lay down, right? Doesn't mean we stop making decisions. It doesn't mean we stop thinking. It means every part of our life comes under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And that changes the question from what do I want to do with my life to Lord, what do you want to do with the life that I've given you? That's the cross, not self-improvement, not behavior modification, not religious performance, not transfer of ownership. Just for the sake of saying, okay, I belong to you. Now I'm going to go and do what I want to do. Because when the real transfer, the real surrender to full ownership occurs, and it's real, freedom starts to look very different. Because true freedom is not being able to do what I want. True freedom is no longer being enslaved to everything that once controlled me. See, our culture has a definition of freedom. America, right? Freedom means I get to do what I want. I get to say what I want. I get to follow whatever desires are strongest at the moment. I get to define truth for myself. I get to live without anyone telling me what to do. That is not biblical freedom, because if I cannot say no to myself, I'm not free. Why do we not see that? It took me a while. If my feelings control me, I'm not free. If my impulses control me, I'm not free. If fear controls me, I'm not free. If the approval of other people controls me, I'm not free. If I know something is hurting me and I still cannot walk away from it, I'm not free. So doing whatever you want is not necessarily freedom. Sometimes it's bondage with better marketing. Galatians 5:1 says, stand fast, therefore, by the liberty which Christ has made us free. I love the version that says, it is for freedom Christ set us free, right? And do not be entangled again to the yoke of bondage. Jesus sets us free. But he does not set us free so we can return to being ruled by everything he delivered us from. He frees us so that we can live under his leadership. That is why Paul continues on in Galatians 5. Walk in the Spirit, and you shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. That's what we're learning to do, is learning to leave that old system, that death system, and start walking in the system of life. There's a difference between being led by the Spirit and being led by desire. The flesh says, I want this now. The Spirit says, this is the way, walk in it. The flesh says, do what feels good. The Spirit says, do what is right. The flesh says, protect yourself. The Spirit says, trust God. The flesh says, get even. The Spirit says, forgive. The flesh says, make sure everyone approves of you. The Spirit says, obey God. And that's why denying yourself is the opposite. Is not the opposite of freedom, right? That's why denying yourself is not the opposite of freedom. It is. I guess I should probably start saying that. Denying yourself is really freedom. Because denying yourself is exactly how freedom is expressed. Think about an addiction. You would never look at someone who could not stop a destructive behavior and say, look how free they are. They're doing what they want. No, we wouldn't say that. We recognize they're being controlled. The ability to follow an impulse is not freedom. Freedom is having the power to say no. No is a complete sentence. It's okay to say no. Freedom is being able to choose what is right. Freedom is no longer being mastered by something that once held you or ruled you. Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 12, all things are lawful for me. I can do whatever I want. Freedom in Jesus, right? But I will not be brought under the power of any. I love there's a scripture that Jesus said, let me just give you the gist of it. It was talking about the enemy was coming. He was talking about Satan himself. And Jesus said, he has nothing in me. So there was nothing. He didn't control him. Okay, he's coming. Who's he? Right? That's such an important question for us. Not simply, can I do this? But is it controlling me? Is it habit controlling me? Is desire controlling me? Is this relationship controlling me? Is fear controlling me? Is approval controlling me? Is my anger controlling me? Is offense controlling me? Is comfort controlling me? Those are very valid questions. What's controlling you? Because anything that you cannot surrender has the power to become your master. It's probably already your master. And Jesus did not come to free us from one bondage just so we can choose another. We don't just move from one to the other and we're free from that, but I'm stuck in this. And I'm free from this, but I'm stuck in this. Romans chapter 6 chapter 6, S-I-X, tells us that we once were slaves to sin, but now we've been set free. Freedom in Christ means sin no longer has the right to us. It doesn't rule us. That does not mean temptation disappears. It does not mean we never struggle. It means that we have a choice that we didn't have before. We can obey God. We can say no to the flesh. We can walk by the Spirit. We can choose truth over lies. We can choose forgiveness over bitterness. We can choose obedience over fear. We can choose faithfulness over an impulse. That is freedom. And this is another place where the upward exchange becomes clear. We lay down the right to do what we want, and we gain the power to live differently. We lay down being controlled by our impulses, and we gain self-control. Isn't that a fruit of the Spirit? It's not something that we have to grow. I'm trying to grow patience. I'm trying to grow self-control. I'm trying to grow love. Because when we exchange, it comes natural. It grows. Fruit tree does not struggle to grow fruit. Fruit emerges when the root is connected rightly. We gain ability to choose what actually produces life. We lay down slavery of the flesh and we gain freedom to walk by the Spirit. And here's the part that can be difficult for us to understand. Boundaries are not always the opposite of freedom. Sometimes boundaries are what protect freedom. A train is free to move when it stays on the track. Take it off the tracks and it's no more free, right? It's not free anymore. It can't move at all. A fish is free to flow and move in the water, but take it out of the water in the name of removing the restrictions, you've not liberated it, right? You've removed it from the environment in which it was created to thrive. We were created to thrive in relationship with God. We were created to thrive when we walk with Him. We were created to thrive under His authority. We were created to thrive when we were led by His Spirit. We were created to flourish. So when God gives us boundaries, He's not trying to keep us from life. He's showing us where life is found. Jesus said in John chapter 8, verses 31 and 32, if you abide in my word, you are my disciples, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Notice the connection, discipleship, truth, freedom. Freedom is not found in throwing off every restraint. Freedom is found by knowing the truth and living in alignment with it. The world said freedom means nobody can tell me what to do. Jesus' freedom means nothing has the power to own me except for the one that I willingly belong to. And because I belong to him, I can finally say no to the things that once controlled me. Now that is freedom. Not the freedom to do what I want, the freedom to become what God created me to be, the freedom to obey him, the freedom to forgive, the freedom to walk away, the freedom to stop hiding, the freedom to tell the truth, the freedom to live without being controlled by fear, the freedom to follow Jesus, even when my feelings are pulling me in another direction. And that brings us to another very personal question, because all of us have something we're tempted to hold on to, something we're afraid to surrender, something we think we need in order to be safe, happy, accepted, or maybe secure. So maybe the question isn't simply whether we believe in Jesus. Maybe the question is what are we still holding onto because we're afraid of following him will leave us with less? What are we still holding onto because we're afraid that when we follow him completely, we're going to be left with less? So this is where the teaching today becomes personal, because there's the one thing to agree that surrendered is an upward exchange. Oh yeah, Cynthia, yeah, tell it, girl, speak the truth. It's another thing to open your hands. Most of us are willing to say, Jesus, I trust you, until he puts his finger on the thing that we're the most afraid to lose. My husband and I have a discussion all the time about stuff. We call it stuffeth. We have too much stuffeth. And what is the reason that we keep all this stuff? We're afraid we're going to need it. Like God couldn't provide it. Should we need it? Right? That's a big conversation. A lot of times there are little things that are holding us up. A lot of times there are bigger things that are holding us up. It doesn't matter the size. What is it that he's got his finger on that we're most afraid to lose? That's where the real struggle begins, because underneath the resistance to surrender is often fear. And if I let this go, what if I let it go? What's going to replace it? What if I obey? Am I going to regret it? I have never regretted obeying God. I don't know anybody who has. I mean, I'm just being honest. I don't know everybody in the world. I don't know every obedience-led Christian, but I've never heard of it. What if I give this relationship to God and I end up alone? Now that's one I've heard, because I deal with women all the time. What if I stop controlling everything and it all falls apart? Like we're doing such a great job, right? What if I say yes to God and his plan looks nothing like mine? What if I surrender the thing that I built my identity around and then he says, that's not you. You got to go this way, right? What if following Jesus really does cost me something deeply that I really want? These are not small questions, but underneath all of them is one deeper question. Do I really believe that Jesus will be enough? God the Father, God the Son, and God the Holy Spirit, will they be enough? Not just in theory, because we can give lip service to that. Oh, he's everything. But is he enough when obedience costs us something? Is he enough when we don't understand? Is he enough when we have to wait? Is he enough when we lose? When we lose something, we lose someone. Is he enough when someone walks away? Is he enough when our plans change? Is he enough when following him takes us somewhere I never expected to go? Now, those are the questions. Because the fear of surrender, really what it's saying is, if I let go of this, I will have less. Jesus keeps inviting us to trust that the life he wants to give us is found on the other side of surrender. The enemy tries to keep us stuck in this. I'm going to end up with less. And God is always more. He is always abundantly more than we could ever ask or think or imagine. He said, whoever loses his life for my sake will find it, not may find it. will find it. But we have to be honest about what that means. Sometimes what we gain is not immediate replacement. Sometimes it's not better circumstances. Sometimes it's not a Cadillac or a Mercedes or a condo on the beach. Sometimes it's not the outcome that we were hoping for before we surrendered. Sometimes the gain is deeper than that. We gain freedom from something that was controlling us. It was making us work hard and perform and people please and be an approval addict and all those things and have a survival mentality. We gain truth where we once believed a lie. We gain peace because we're no longer carrying what belongs to God. We gain a greater dependence on Him. We gain maturity and authority and power. We gain obedience. We gain the ability to hear Him more clearly because we're no longer demanding that He agree with us. And ultimately, we gain Him. That has to be enough, because if the only reason I surrender something to God is because I expect Him to give me something I like better, that's not really surrender. That's a negotiation. That's a transaction. Surrender says, Jesus, even if I don't understand what happens next, I trust you and I'm giving this up. This is a very different mentality. So let me ask you, what are you holding on to? What have you already sensed that God is asking you to release? What are you trying to control because you're afraid of what will happen if you don't? What is it that you keep defending? What relationship are you afraid to fully place in God's hands? What dream have you decided God must fulfill before you're going to fully surrender, or He has to do this for me to be okay? And can we negotiate this out? What identity are you protecting? What fear is keeping you from getting the final correct vote, right? A surrender vote. What are you unwilling to surrender because some part of you still believes that Jesus will leave you with less? You don't have to answer publicly, but you do need to answer it honestly. Because sometimes the thing that stands between us and greater freedom is not that God has failed to give us something. Sometimes it's that our hands are full, and sometimes that our hands are still full, and we're still gripping what we're afraid to lose. And we're wondering why these things aren't happening for us. And Jesus is saying, trust me, open your hands, follow me. This is the upward exchange. Lay down self-rule. Learn to trust me. Lay down bondage and begin to walk in freedom. Lay down lies and receive truth. Lay down fear and choose faith. Lay down the temporary and begin to live for what is eternal. Lay down ownership of your life and discover what it means to belong fully to Jesus. None of that means following Him will be easy. That's not what He promised. He told us to count the cost, but He also told us that the life we're so afraid to lose is the very life that will never truly find fullness of life when we hang on to it. The question is not whether following Jesus will cost you something. It will. Straight up, Jesus is right out the truth. It's whether you believe that what you gain in Him is worth more than what you're being asked to surrender. Let me repeat that. The question is whether you believe that what you gain in Him is worth more than what you're being asked to surrender. So today, do not just ask, what am I giving up? Ask, what am I being invited into? Don't just look at what's leaving your hands, right? Look at the one who is asking you to trust Him. And maybe your next step is not to fix everything. Maybe it's simply to identify the one thing you know that you've been gripping. Name it. Name it before Jesus and say, Lord, I've been afraid if I give this to you that I'll have less. But I choose. I'm going to make the choice. I don't see what's going to happen. I have a little bit of fear involved, but I'm choosing to rise above those and trust you more than me. And because I believe that I belong to you. And I want to walk more fully in that. That is where surrender begins. That's right. That's where freedom grows, right? That's where it goes. That's where it is. That's where you begin to be released from all these heavy weights and burdens. And all of a sudden, the people that are around you start to change. Some go closer and some back up because they want you to, not everybody wants you to get free. Not everybody wants you to grow in Jesus. That's the truth. That's where we have to stop trying to start. We have to stop trying to start, right? That was kind of oxymoron. We have to stop trying to save our own lives. And this is where we begin to find the life that Jesus has been calling us into all along. And that life, as we close today, that life starts with knowing who you are and knowing who you are because of him, and recognizing that there has been the enemy who has been working to keep you from walking in freedom. By the way, if we have never been introduced, my name is Cynthia, and you can find me pretty much anywhere as this channel as Cynthia Martin Online. I'd love to have you join me. I'd love for you to come over to Substack and join the article over there, Daughters Who Flourish. It's a free weekly article that comes out on Wednesdays. Join this YouTube channel, subscribe, watch the videos, right? I'd love to have you. I put out a video on Tuesday, pretty much every week on Tuesday, if not more than that a week. But on Tuesday, there will be a video. And then on Wednesday, there's an article. I'd love to have you come aboard, because as we follow Jesus, we need to remember how important it is that we know who our God is. We know who we are. We know we have an enemy. And when we can bring all that together in surrender, right, we can walk in freedom and we can be daughters who flourish. God bless you. And I'll see you again next week.